It was the 1800s, and Japan was a bit of an isolated nation. From the mid-1600s to about 1866, Japan was under a period of sakoku, meaning period of national isolation. However, even with this in place, the nation wasn't entirely free of foreign influence. Trade with the Dutch was done regularly, especially after the Netherlands was liberated in 1815. This trade started a resurgence of interest in foreign culture, so much so that an organization was formed named the Bansha, which sought to figure out ways in which Japan could be improved with foreign knowledge. Notable members included people such as Watanabe Kazan and Takano Choei. Watanabe Kazan took interest in Dutch military and naval science after finding more out about the Western world in Edo. He couldn't speak Dutch himself, so he had other individuals, notably Choei, translate Dutch texts for him. Takano Choei, on the other hand, took interest in Western-style medicine at the age of 16, after being from a family of physicians. He ended up translating many Dutch texts into Japanese and writing works of his own on healthcare. However, in spite of these accomplishments, the 1825 expulsion edict was passed by the Tokugawa Bakufu, which took aggressive action against any foreign vessels attempting to enter Japan. A major reason as to why this was passed, as explained in Shinran, a collection of essays from Confucian scholar Aizawa Seishisai, was due to an increase in foreign vessels, particularly English ships, treading on Japanese waters. Japan had previously taken a more passive stance on these ships, but Aizawa held the firm belief that a passive stance would only allow Japan to get taken over by Western barbarians. He believed these Western people aren't just trying to acquire Japanese resources to survive, they're doing so to eventually conquest. They're draining our resources, they're not respecting our laws, and they're brainwashing our citizens with their religion. These Western barbarians must be stopped. This led to some incredibly destructive events in the following years, particularly the Morrison incident in 1837, where a merchant ship was delivering back shipwrecked Japanese nationals, yet Japan still fired on it and drove it away. The Bakufu had misunderstood and thought that the English sinologist Robert Morrison was manning the ship, and thought it was incredibly suspicious that he was doing so. However, it was not Robert Morrison that was manning the ship, rather it was an American merchant, Charles W. King, and the ship was called the Morrison. So this whole misunderstanding led to them essentially firing on their own people. Unfortunately though, these anti-Western ideals within the Bakufu did not end there. In 1839, the Bansha were brought to trial during an event known as the Bansha no Goku, in which Watanabe Kazan was placed under house arrest, and Takano Choei received a life sentence in prison. This all made the Tenpo era of Japan a really harsh place to live in for those interested in foreign culture, since the Sakoku period was so oppressive in its beliefs. This isolationist policy was also extremely harmful during the 1930s, since there was the Great Tenpo famine in which crops were getting destroyed, and Japanese citizens had to solely rely on merchants. A more interdependent policy could have really helped the people of Japan survive, and prevented thousands from dying of hunger those years. But let's flash forward. Let's flash forward centuries into the future. Let's go to 2006. Or more technically, let's go to Tenpo era year 14. Ghost Slayer's Ayashi. Ghost Slayer's Ayashi focuses on the Barbarian Knowledge Enforcement, or the Ayashi, who are tasked with fighting these monsters called Yoi, that are known to attack Japan and cause destruction. The series already takes place a bit later into the Tenpo era, where the idea behind it is to prove that this foreign knowledge is both useful to Japan, while at the same time not going to taint Japanese culture. The group itself is filled with unlikely heroes. The leader of the Ayashi, Ogasawara, while on the surface may look like your average Japanese samurai, is very passionate about trying to get foreign learning to be viewed in a positive light, and will do whatever he can to ensure that happens. There's also the other members of the group. Saizo, a young girl who dresses like a boy due to her background in male-only theater, Genbutsu, a cross-dressing man who is also a Shinto priest, Abi, a member of the isolated mountain tribe, and Yukiatsu, a vagrant who has the power of Ayagami, an ability that allows him to draw weapons from one's own name. What makes this crew so interesting is that because of their separate backgrounds, it goes to show that anyone in Japan is capable of doing good work, regardless of where they came from. The yoi that the Ayashi fight all derive from a place called the Other World, of which Yukiatsu is one of the only people who has gone to that other world and returned unscathed. But what is this other world, and what causes the yoi to awaken in Japan? The other world is essentially the land of yoi, but in essence, it's neither necessarily a good place or a bad place, and the reason these yoi awaken in our world is due to people. Due to people's strong beliefs and passions, which eventually, when these yoi are awakened, lead to calamity. It's important to have strong beliefs and strong convictions, but it grows to become a problem when these beliefs lead to destruction. And in a lot of ways, that's what happens with a lot of people both in fiction and non-fiction. They feel this sort of passion about them, but ultimately disregard the other side of the argument. While the Japanese government may be very anti-Western and those beliefs may have caused Japan a lot of problems, that doesn't automatically rule out any and every political idea they may have. Now, I had mentioned earlier how the other world is neither good nor bad, and that is because it has its own share of ups and downs. The other world does allow the yoi to stay away from Japan and therefore prevent chaos, but how the people utilize this other world is unfortunately where the downsides come in. People get caught up in this other world because to them, it's much better than the world they currently live in. To them, it's an echo chamber. They don't have to deal with any opposing ideas, and they don't live through any trials. But by living in this other world and getting trapped in it, they end up helping nobody in the process. They don't help themselves because they never grow, and they don't help Japan because they don't try to make positive reform, other than awakening yoi, which only in the end causes more problems. This is why the Ayashi are so beneficial to Japan in the series, because not only do they try to push Western learning, but they also attempt to save Edo from the potential terror that the yoi can cause. Ghost Slayer's Ayashi takes a very individualist stance on Tenpo-era Japan. This is shown through the character of Atoll, an Aztec girl who left Texas after the United States took it over, in hopes of finding a better life in Japan. In essence, she's very different from a lot of the people in Japan, but Yukiatsu would argue that all of us, regardless of where we've derived from, are all very different from each other. His own problems as a vagrant, while they may have some similarities to other people in Japan, at the end of the day are his own individual experiences. It's because of everyone's different experiences and viewpoints that makes the concept of discrimination so ridiculous to him. We're all so different, and why can't the shogunate see that? Yukiatsu also holds a very strong belief that when committing a wrongdoing, one should atone through apology and make changes to ensure that the same mistake isn't made twice. Which is a very huge contrast in particular to a character like Tamahei, a policeman who seems to just enjoy punishing people and catching them doing something wrong. And this is especially a huge contrast when one puts it into the historical context of the time, where people were put to death simply for studying Western culture. With all of this in mind, a major question comes into play. Why put out a show like this in 2006? The events that the show portrays are already 200 years old at this point. They couldn't possibly still be relevant. The answer to that is both a yes and a no. Ghost Slayer's Ayashi manages to showcase how far Japan has come since then. Keep in mind, there actually were the seclusion edicts in 1635, 200 years prior to the Tenpo era, where Japan made an attempt to eliminate foreign influence through death and harsh punishment. Then 200 years later, they do the same exact thing through events like the Bansha no Goku. But then, less than 200 years from the Tenpo era, and now people can openly study Western culture in Japan. A step backwards from that, however, is something I mentioned in another video of mine that happened in 2006. The incident in which Japan's Minister of Agriculture went to a Japanese restaurant in Colorado, was appalled by the sushi, and then proposed that Japanese officials go undercover in foreign restaurants in order to make sure that these restaurants served authentic sushi. Feel free to view my video in defense of sushi police for more info on what transpired there. But the point being, a government official in 2006 was still showcasing an overt protectiveness and trying to maintain Japanese culture, to the point where he was attempting to destroy other cultures in the process. Over sushi of all things. This is why something like Ghost Slayer's Ayashi is still so important to Japanese audiences. Yes, Japan has come a long way from the times in which the Bancha were slain simply for taking an interest in Western culture, but Japan still has a long way to go if they want to become more open as a nation. Ghost Slayer's Ayashi understands the importance of maintaining Japan's own culture, but at the same time also believes that trying to rid itself of foreign influence, as well as insulting cultures different from one's own, will only be a step backwards for the land of the rising sun. Thank you for watching. If you liked this video, feel free to give it a like, as well as subscribe if you'd like to see similar content in the future. All the sources for this video will be in the description. If you'd like to discuss more about Ghost Slayer's Ayashi or anything I brought up in this video, feel free to join my Discord. And as always, I'll catch you later.